Hello, my dear friends. The opening phrase of the Parsha, Vayikra El Moshe. The word Vayikra has an aleph at the end. If you look at the Sefer Torah, you see the aleph is small. It's a mystery. Why in the world would the aleph be small? There's countless explanations. There's a Sefer called Megala Amukos, which was written by a Kabbalist, Rav Natan Asan Shapiro, 17th century Kabbalist. He has 1,000 explanations, amazingly, for why the aleph is small. The aleph is called an aleph is the era. Why is that aleph small? 1,000 explanations. The most well-known explanation is that of the Baal Turim. The Baal Turim says that Moshe Rabbeinu was Anam Mikol Adam. The Chumash says he was more modest than any other person on the face of the earth. He didn't want to write the word Vayikra. Moshe is the one that transcribed the Torah. God dictated and he transcribed it. He didn't want to write Vayikra because Rashi says that when God spoke to Moshe, it was Vayikra. When he spoke to Bilam, who was the non-Jewish prophet, it was Vayakar. Almost the same word, but the difference is the extra aleph. Vayikra means that he spoke deliberately, and it's a sign of chibah, of love and affection. Vayakar is haphazard. When God spoke to Bilam, it was just, God didn't really want to talk to Bilam. But for whatever reason, he addressed him as he allowed him to have prophecy. But it is Vayakar. It was just accidental, coincidental, haphazardly. Moshe wanted to write Vayakar El Moshe, that God appeared to Moshe the same way he appeared to Bilam without the aleph. Vayakar, but God insisted he has to write Vayikra. But Moshe, in his modesty, wrote the aleph Zira, so it shouldn't be a small aleph. So it shouldn't be so obvious that it was Vayikra and that he's a great. He didn't want to show off. He's a great person, and God talks to him. So he wrote the aleph Zira. I want to offer a thought that I think is relevant to our own lives. Rashi says that Moshe was the only one that heard God call. Vayikra Moshe. God called out to Moshe from the Olam Moed, from the tabernacle. Only Moshe heard the call of God. So Rashi says, why? How come only Moshe heard it? How come nobody else? He says, maybe it's because God whispered to Moshe. He spoke softly. Rashi says, it's not the case. It says in Tehillim, Kol Hashem HaKoach, Kol Hashem Bahadar, Kol Hashem Shovar Razim. God's voice is powerful. God's voice is majestic. God's voice shatters cedar trees. So how come nobody else heard God calling? So Rashi says, because it was only Moshe that heard it. It wasn't because it was quiet. It just so happened that it was only Moshe was able to hear God calling. Why is that? What's the reason why only Moshe was able to hear? Rashi offers an explanation, but I would suggest it's because when God talks to man, He speaks to man all the time. God's constantly talking to us. He talks to us through history. He talks to us through current events. He talks to us through the parnasa that we have to earn. He talks to us through our health. He talks to us when it comes to raising children and having shalom bayis. Everything that happens in our lives is orchestrated by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And these are all, when these things happen, it's always God talking to us. So if that's the case, how come we don't hear God talking to us? So the answer is because you have to be tuned in to hear God talking to you. You have to know that the events and that history and everything that's happening in our lives is all being orchestrated by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's true, maybe intellectually we know that, but we're not sensitized to it. Moshe Rabbeinu was the one who stood on Har Sinai and he spoke directly to Kadosh Baruch Hu. He heard God talking to him. Moshe Rabbeinu understood that everything that transpires in the world is God talking to man, and therefore Moshe heard God speaking. Moshe Rabbeinu heard Vayikra. He heard the Vayikra is spelled with an aleph at the end. Aleph represents HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch, because the aleph is numerical value of 1. God is echad. If you perceive that there's a God orchestrating everything in the world, then it's Vayikra. Then it's not Vayakar, it's not haphazard. But if you take away the aleph, if you don't realize that the world is being run by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that you think things happen on their own, so then it's Vayakar. Then you don't hear, then it's just coincidental. Without the aleph, it's Vayakar. That's how Bilam was addressed. And then you don't feel the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So that is the reason why Moshe, that's why the aleph of Vayikra is small, because man has to be able to hear, to find the aleph. Most people don't see the aleph. Most of the time, we even though we know that the God is running the world, we don't feel the presence of a Kadosh Baruch Hu, and we don't see the Aleph, and therefore we don't hear God speaking to us. Then it's just Vayikra. It's just that these things happen. It says in Tehillim, Hashemayim misaprin kavod kel. The heavens proclaim the glory of Hashem. How come when you take a walk and you look up, I'm looking up now to the sky, why don't we hear it? You see it in the background in my video. Why don't we hear God calling to us from the Shemayim? The answer is because we fail to see the Al Zira. We say in Tehillim on Shabbos twice, in Tehillim, Yoshe b'seisei elyon. The plain meaning is that the person who dwells in the protection of God above. But I would say it could be interpreted as Yoshe b'seisei elyon. The God dwells above. Yoshe, he dwells elyon above. Where does God dwell? B'seiser, in hiding, in seclusion. We don't see God. God's there. He's there. He's every place. God, everything that happens in the world is being orchestrated by God, but God's presence fills the Eino Milvado. God's presence fills the entire world. So, but it's Yoshe b'seiser elyon. But he's above, but it's b'seiser. You look above, you don't see God. What do you see? Clouds, or the sun. But we fail to see the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's now, I'm outside recording for the first time in the last few months. Because the weather is changing. It's spring. I love being outside. You see the beauty of nature. I just drove down North 8th. The trees, most of the trees are still dead. There's no blossoms. Maybe there's a little tiny blossom. You can hardly see them. The cherry trees are all blossoming. How did the cherry trees know to blossom at this time of the year? Who told them? And if you wait another week, all the trees will have leaves in there. How did they figure it out? The trees were dead the whole winter. How did they spring back to life? So I know the scientists will tell you some type of explanation. But after the whole explanation, it's still a mystery. How did it happen? And I'll tell you even a bigger mystery is the fact that there's birds chirping in the background now. The birds came back from Florida. They all went south for the winter, snowbirds. They went south. How did they know how to go to Florida? How did they know the winter was coming? How did they know how to get to Florida? With a GPS, with a road map. How did they know? And then, how did they know, sitting in Florida, how did the birds know that the winter's over, that the winter ended? Who told them? In Florida, there never was a winter. The whole time it was warm. So how did the birds know that it's now safe to come back? And they come back and they fly in formation. It's just the most amazing thing to watch how birds fly. How do they coordinate that? You would need if you had 1,000 planes flying together, you need such a complicated computer system that the planes shouldn't bump into each other and crash. How did the birds and they fly this way and they fly that way, and I don't know who they follow, the leader or whoever. It's just stunning. So, okay, maybe one day the scientists I don't think they have any clue how this happens. Maybe one day they'll begin to understand a little bit how the bird with a little small brain is able to figure out all you need the most powerful computers to coordinate all this. Maybe they'll figure out an explanation, but the fact that a bird is capable of that is Hashem, is Hashemayim misaprin kol kel. The heavens are proclaiming the glory of Hashem. It's Vayikra. God is calling. So why doesn't it make an impression on us? It doesn't make an impression because we don't see the small. We don't see the Aleph Zira. If you don't see the Aleph Zira, if you don't feel the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so it's no wonder you don't see HaKadosh Baruch Hu orchestrating everything in the world. I read a beautiful story that reflects this idea that the Al Zira, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Vayikra, that God is calling. There was a Talmud Chacham who was a publisher of Kisvei Yad, and he was a manuscripts. He would go to libraries and do research. A young man, he came to one library and he was working there during the day, and then he broke for lunch, and he ate a sandwich, and then he benched. So this was in Israel. So the librarian, one of the librarians, a young woman, was there, and she overheard him saying in the benching, now we don't say in benching, we say, the first part, means we won't be embarrassed, we won't be humiliated. He added the phrase, I won't stumble forever. So this young woman was intrigued, and she said, "Why did you add the phrase V'lo Nikashel? I never heard it said that way." So he said, "That's the Mizorah I have from my father. That's how my father taught me." She says, "Well, where did he get it from?" So he was a researcher. He says, "I'm not sure. I'll find out. I'll let you know." He was surprised that here was a secular. She wasn't an observant woman. Why is she so interested in why he says V'lo Nikashel? As later in the day when he left the library, the young woman reminded me, "Remember, you said you would find out from me where it comes from, Loni Kosher." Okay, so he went home. He made a promise. He really didn't see the purpose. He promised he would find out for her. So he found out. He did some research. He found in some different Sidurim where, in fact, it says it that way, Loni Kosher. He made a photocopy. He circled with a red pen, Loni Kosher, and he sent it to this young woman. Fast forward, a few years later, he gets an invitation in the mail to a wedding. He doesn't know who the chassan and kala is. He doesn't understand why they invited him, but he decided they invited him. He'll go. He'll wish them a mazel tov. Maybe he'll find out what's the reason why they invited him to the wedding. He goes to the wedding. He doesn't recognize the chassan and kala. He was about to leave, and then a man comes over to him, and he says, rushes over, and he says, "Is your name so and so?" He says, "Yes." He says, "The kala wants to speak to you before you leave." So he goes to see the kala. The kala says, "I'm getting married today because of you." She says, "When you're the person. I'm the librarian who was in the library 5 years ago, and you sent me the letter that showed it was V'lo Nikashel Omed circled. Do you know that changed my life? I grew up in a religious home, and then I became secularized and not religious, not observant, and I met a young man who wasn't Jewish, became romantically involved, and he proposed to me. And I was considering getting married to him, but I told him, it's going to be so difficult with my family; they're not going to understand. So the person said, "Well, let's move to America. You'll be away from your family. It'll be easier for you to transition." She said, "Give me a day or two to think about it." So I was supposed to get back to him a certain day. That day, your letter arrived in the mail. And I saw in the letter the words "V'lo Nikashel" circled, that one should not stumble for eternity, and the words were like a dagger in my heart, and I felt God is talking to me. That young woman, she heard the Al Zira. She could have attributed it to Vayikra, just coincidence. She said, "God's talking to me. He's telling me don't do it, because it'll be for eternity. You're going to be a yikashel. You're going to be. It's going to be a terrible consequences for you would stumble for the rest for eternity." And I broke up the relationship, and then I decided that let me return back to my roots. I became Torah observant, became a Baal Tshuva, and I met this young man who also was a Baal Tshuva, and we decided to get married. So here, the two of us are getting married because you sent me the letter. But it was his letter. But the reason why it had an impact was because she could have ignored it. She could have said it's Vayikra, it's a coincidence. But she saw the Vayikra, she saw the Aleph Zeira. And that's so important in our lives, to be able to whatever transpires, to feel the Aleph Zeira. And the past 5 years of our lives have been the most tumultuous and the most difficult and the most consequential. First, we had COVID, and we forget so quickly all the things, the gymnastics and the somersaults that we had to do, walk around with masks and stay away from people, and we closed the shuls, and then when we opened them, we would daven only a few people in the room at a time. We had multiple. And there were so many people who became sick, and so many people died. I remember the different friends that I had that passed away during COVID. Every time I think about it, it's with pain, and God turned the world upside down. It was from a little germ that escaped from a laboratory or what market, whatever it was, someplace in China, and it affected the whole world. So if you don't see the Al Zira, so then if you don't see the little owl, so if you don't see God's operating behind the scenes, so everything just, it's too bad. It was bad luck. But for somebody who's Torah observant, we recognize the Aleph Zira. We realize it's Vayikra. It's Vayikra. God's calling. What's the message? So many different messages. I spoke about it many times, and other Rabbanan, and we've all thought about it. Maybe God wants to inspire us to be more sensitive to others, to daven more kavana, to to appreciate that everything was hashgacha pratis, to value life, to understand it, not to take it for granted. Whatever the message is, but you have to see the Al Zira. If you don't, if you think that it just happened because of sloppiness in a laboratory, then you're missing the whole point. Since October 7th, for the Jewish world has turned upside down. It's been totally transformed. The tragedies of October 7th, the 1,200 people that were murdered, and the subsequent, the hundreds of Chayalim that lost their lives, and thousands of Chayalim that were maimed and wounded, and the anti-Semitism which is unfathomable. You can't even explain why do they hate us so much. Why are the people supporting Hamas? I just had a conversation with somebody yesterday. You have to be incredulous. Why in the world would people support Hamas? These are the worst of the worst of the worst, the most immoral, cruel, unethical people. What, even before Israel retaliated, already there were demonstrations all across America and across the world in favor of Hamas. It makes absolutely no sense. But if you know that there's a Vayikra, and the Vayikra, the end of Vayikra is the Al Zeros, and then you know the Rabbi Shem is running the show. Why? There's many lessons that we have to learn, and we're coming now to Pesach, and we have to integrate the experience of the last 18 months into our Seder, and to relate it to that we went in Mitzrayim, we went from a period of Avdus to Cheres. So there's a process going on, and there's reasons why HaKadosh Baruch Hu orchestrates history in the way he does it. Again, many different lessons to be learned. I've given many drushes about it, other rabbanim, you thought about it. But the main point is to be able to appreciate the Aleph Zira. If you don't see the Aleph Zira, then everything is just bad luck. It's bad mazel. It's just unfathomable. But if you see this, if you appreciate the Aleph Zira, then you understand that everything is being orchestrated. Even the situation with the hostages, we have to daven more. We have to be with more kavanah. We shouldn't take everything. We become so accustomed now. You have to daven because you have to recognize it's up to HaKadosh Baruch Hu to correct the situation. I have to see he's controlling all the events. He's Yoshe B'Seis Elyon. He's up in the sky, far away. He's not far away, but in secretly, he's moving all the chess pieces around. If we feel that, then we know that the world is not haphazard. It's not by Yakar. It's being orchestrated by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that makes all the difference in the world. Thank you for listening, and have a wonderful Shabbos.